right, hey guys, don't mind the red face. I just did my face for the morning and I did a little bit of face massage, and so it's a little perky at the moment. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about agriculture, religion, skin cancer, the female brain at menopause, and a couple of other things, okay? And how it all ties together and how it is all part of a dramatic shift in the way humans have lived on this planet, and why it's important and why it's relevant and why it's something that more people should be aware of, okay? Now, with that said, okay, those of you that watch my videos and those of you that have watched my videos that are now deleted, okay, know that I have a complete and total belief, okay, and it is a belief, so I'm not going to try to force it on anybody, okay? It's a belief. I can't prove it. I could actually connect the dots and lay out a whole bunch of facts for you to come to your own conclusion, okay? But I don't believe in improbabilities, and I don't believe in massive mind-blowing coincidences. I don't believe in random accidents. I don't believe in this idea that we are moving in this direction because it's just what's happening. Like, I believe cause and effect. I believe everything is cause and effect. And I believe that there are motivations behind everything that we see happening on this planet, okay? And the motivation behind it is not for humanity's highest good, okay? And I'm going to try to connect some dots for you today, okay? So it's a lot for my brain to have to hold because I want to try to weave in a lot of different concepts into the same major concept, okay? And it's just a lot for my brain to hold, okay? And if I were to pull in everything, I wouldn't be able to do it. It would literally, probably take me months and months and months to pull all those thoughts together to make it even remotely cohesive. I don't feel like writing a book, and I'm not going to do that, okay? So I'm going to try to do it in piecemeal. So I've talked a lot about these subjects independently over the couple of years I've been on YouTube. And I've also talked about them in ways that pull them together to draw connections so that you can look at them and connect the dots. But today I want to do it. I just want to do it in a slightly different way, okay? So I hope this makes sense for you guys. So if you look at our history, human history, it was roughly 12,000 years ago, if we believe the timeline. Do I believe the timeline? I don't, but that's just the narrative, okay? And at this time, I know that there's people that debate the narrative, that debate the timeline, really smart people, and I do think there's more to the Dateline story, okay? But I'm just going to say 12,000 years. Does it matter how many years? It really doesn't, okay? So let's just leave that over there, okay? But what you see is the introduction of agriculture and religion, okay? So religion and agriculture was the separation between the humans that were living before the agricultural revolution and religion and the humans after, okay? And I'm going to keep some ideas to myself right now because I don't really want to, I don't want to paint myself as crazy, okay? Because I do have some very interesting ideas that other people have thought about too. So it's not just me, okay? And a lot of these ideas I've actually had since I was a child, so they're not influenced by outside narratives, But as I get older, I realize that other people thought this too. And then you start to be like, wow, there's actually a theory about this. Like, there is legit a theory. And this is something that I just happened to think at like 8 years old. Like, my 8-year-old little brain would think this. Okay. And my parents were, let me tell you, not into any of this. And this was not even remotely talked about when I was a kid. Because you got to remember, I'm close to 60. Okay. And I'm not saying people weren't talking about it behind closed doors, but I wasn't introduced to it at all. All right. So it was just my own thinking, my own thoughts, or my own knowing, I guess. That's kind of how I feel. I feel like it was a deep knowing. And this split was dramatic. Okay. It wasn't a trickle, it was literally like boom. And the researchers know this. Okay. So it wasn't like this slow transition. It was like all of a sudden, here it shows up. All right. So, what this leads any critical thinking person to think is that there was a reset. There was an absolute turn the light on or shut the light off, however you want to look at it, introduce a completely new reality. There was a reset. And then we have the whole theory of evolution narrative, which I don't believe for 1 second. No, I don't deny every element of that narrative, but there's so many things that are just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Like the genetic truth that you can't put two species together and breed. You don't get a hybrid, okay? You can only do that through a laboratory, okay? So doesn't happen in nature. And the way they've tricked people into thinking it can happen in nature is because they will say that when you put a coyote with a wolf, they can create another animal, a hybrid, or a grizzly bear with a polar bear. But coyotes and wolves are fucking dogs, okay? They're not different species. They want you to believe they are because they make up their own definitions. That's what they do. They make up their own definitions so that they can spew their stories to people, okay? And a grizzly bear and a polar bear are still the same species. They're still bears, okay? And then they've had to change the theory of evolution a few times too, because when I was in school, we learned that we were like direct descendants of primates, and we're not. We're not. Okay. So they've changed their story, which goes to tell you it's because they're constantly getting caught, and then they change their story. And right now they're getting caught again. And you can see the story shifting in some realms, but some people are really hell-bent on it and they're clinging to it like it's, like their life depends on it, okay? And you have to remember the narrative does depend on it, and the agenda does depend on it, okay? But it's interesting that the controllers kind of knew this theory would fall apart at some point, and they have religion to fall back on because religion is the other side of the narrative. They are not opposing narratives, okay? They actually feed each other. They fuel each other because they create chaos, all right? And we all know the system loves chaos, okay? Loves chaos. So you have the introduction of religion onto the planet, which matches the time of the agricultural revolution. People were forced into agriculture because of the gods, okay, and what the gods wanted and were dictating humans to do, okay? You see where I'm going with this, right? Okay? And they know through the archaeological evidence that the switch to agriculture was probably the worst human disaster ever. It destroyed our health. It destroyed our brains. It destroyed everything about us. It created war and famine and slavery and built empires, okay? And horrible health, all right? Absolutely horrible health. People's teeth started falling out. Our brains shrunk. Now, yeah, if you Google this, you're going to get the mainstream narrative, okay? They don't want people to know the truth, but this information is there and you can find it if you keep searching, okay? But that's all I'm going to say about it. Okay, is you've got to have some persistence, okay? Because you're not going to get it. It's not the surface narrative, all right? So now you have a reset, and people were forced into this agricultural revolution, but there were cultures that refused to go that way. They remained hunter-gatherers, okay? They would not go. So they lived on the periphery, all right? They lived an entirely different reality, okay? And they saw what was happening and they didn't want anything to do with it. Nothing. Absolutely nothing, okay? And this is probably where the split of the genetic line is, okay? So you have certain humans that have certain genetic programs that don't fit into this world, into this agricultural world, okay? And then there's people that had different genetic variants that happened to allow them to be able to adapt to that agricultural, religious, warlike world, okay? And I guess I'm going to stop there because I could go down rabbit holes that will last for hours, okay? So let's just leave it at that. So you had kind of original human blueprint, and then you have something happen to the blueprint, okay? And a lot of these religions talk about interbreeding, okay? Interbreeding with these gods, and it gets gross, okay? It gets really gross, and I'm not really gonna talk a whole lot about that right now because I don't know. It's a video for another day. And I don't know the whole truth, all right? But just the Jesus story should tell us something, okay? That Mary got pregnant with God's baby. I mean, really? Really? Okay, sure. So again, where are your critical thinking skills? That's all I'm saying. Where are your critical thinking skills, okay? So, if these beings came to the planet, and it looks like they did, because there's a lot of evidence from stories and stuff that they did, okay? That interbreeding with humans, started interbreeding with them and started changing the genetic pool. But there were these original humans that didn't. They wanted nothing to do with it. Nothing, okay? And from my understanding, this interbreeding was massive. It was massive, okay? And that was when the whole system started to radically and dramatically change. So we're talking a long game, okay? A long game, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, a long game. It's starting to make you think, right? A little bit, at least I hope, okay? So now we have this massive genetic experiment going on. And I'm not saying that what was happening before wasn't a genetic experiment either. Okay, we don't know what created all of this. We don't freaking know, right? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But they know that religion literally showed up on the planet, okay, at a certain time, and it was that same time that agriculture popped up. And agriculture has been a disaster for human life, okay? Humanity in general. And then illness was so rampant, okay, on the planet. And then, of course, there were healers that knew how to use herbs as medicine and what have you. But then there was a time when the modern system that we know today was introduced on the planet. Now, did it look different? Yes. Did they use different things? Yes. But it was the modern system of using these synthetic or poison chemicals, poisonous substances, or what have you, as medicine. Okay, now some would argue that plant medicine is poison and toxins, and I won't deny that. Okay, they are, all right? But the difference is that a plant compound has hundreds of different chemicals in it, so you're not getting a large amount of any one thing, okay? So you're really getting a large amount of any one particular toxic compound, whereas with The modern medicine that was coming onto the scene was a whole different story. Okay, a whole different story. And there are a few plant exceptions, though, where the plant is predominantly a specific chemical that can absolutely be toxic, and you have to be very, very, very careful. Okay, I'm not going to get into that, though. I'm not going to get into herbalism today, I promise. All right, I just wanted to give you that background. Okay, so let's keep going. And now we get to the first industrial revolution, which was the first turning up the dial. Okay, this was like the massive turning up the dial of the long game agenda. I'm not going to get into the first industrial revolution. I would encourage you to do some research if you're curious, but just know that it was devastating to human health, devastating to humanity. And this is when we start with the narratives of how everybody was dying before modern medicine and everybody, yeah, they were a mess. They were already a mess from the agricultural shift, and now they're a mess because of the Industrial Revolution. And we're talking coal mines, and we're talking the start of the world that we have today. This is when it really started to get some legs. They had been building it through the empires and the agricultural revolution. And now we have the first industrial revolution. And there might have even been one before this, maybe. It's really, really hard to get good information, but the first industrial revolution was the absolute nail in our fucking coffin, okay? And then we have the second industrial revolution, which really was the dynamite, okay? It was the dynamite that literally lit this thing off, and we have been rapid fire since then, okay? Rapid fire. And now the next phase is the digital EMF, synthetic reality starting to blast open, okay? And it's through the whole petrochemical, metals, using these to form their synthetic reality. Now, I have nothing against petrochemicals, nothing, okay? Or should I say petroleum? I don't want to say petrochemicals because that is highly manipulated to serve their agenda, unfortunately. But I have no problem with petroleum. Our ancient ancestors used it. Okay, I have no problems with petroleum. But what the Industrial Revolution has done with petroleum and created all of these petrochemicals, this is the problem. This is the problem, okay? And then what happened was they released all of this stored carbon from the earth and liberated it. And much of it is poison, okay? Because it's not just petroleum bubbling up out of the earth and people using that, okay? This is being massively pumped out into our environment, flooding the environment, okay? And a lot of them are just poisons. They're toxins and poisons, okay? So the Industrial Revolution has been an absolute disaster on every level, but it's given humanity convenience, right? And we have grocery stores, and we have washing machines, and we have all of these things in our lives that make us comfortable, but yet the average person has to get up every day and go slave for some kind of business for at least 8 hours a day. Many people have to work way more hours than that now, okay? And you're basically trading one thing for another. And it's just that simple, okay? And during the agricultural revolution, humanity was working multiple hours a day, many, many hours a day for the gods and the humans that were claiming that they were God's chosen ones and forcing everybody into slavery, okay? Slavery. So every single race on this planet has been subjected to slavery, okay? Whether you're white, black, green, brown, purple, yellow, it doesn't matter, okay? So humanity was turned into a slave people, a slave race, okay? We're still slaves. We're still slaves. Some are just physically being beaten and tortured and owned, so to speak, in a way that other people aren't, but we are all slaves. Okay, and even if you live on the grid, you're still a slave because truthfully, they can come take your shit at any time. Okay, and if you own property, you still have to pay taxes. Okay, so we're all slaves, all of us. All right, I know it's daunting. I know. However, you can't erase the original code. What they can manipulate it. Okay, they can manipulate it. But because that original blueprint is literally infused into every aspect of our being and every cell of our body, they can manipulate it, but it cannot be erased, which is why you've always had your divergence. You've always had your neurodivergent people that refused to go along with the system. They wiped them out. Okay, they tried to kill them initially with a lot of the wars. Okay, and then during the religious movements, when they started to build their empires, they tried to annihilate these people even more. Okay, and these were the Crusades, and these were things like that. And you're going to hear other narratives from religious people, and you're going to hear other narratives from the mainstream because they don't want people to know the truth. But that's what the Crusades were. Okay, and it's happened with all of the major religions. Okay. The Muslim religions, the Jewish religion, the Catholic religion. Those are the three main Abrahamic religions, okay, on the planet. And then there's a bunch of offshoots, all right? But they got where they are because they murdered all the resistors, okay? They were violent, organized mobsters, okay? So we're clear on this, right? Like this is not debatable. Okay. Then they started going into all of these areas to conquer them and capture them. All right. I mean, for people who don't know this because they've been so brain damaged, oh, it's just so sad that their brains and their minds and their being has been so manipulated to believe absolute monstrous lies from criminals. It's just so sad. Same thing with Big Pharma. We've been lied to. We've been seriously lied to. Okay. So in Vedic texts, and again, there was a shift there too. All right. There was a reset with the Vedic stuff too. Okay. So I'm not defending the current stuff. Okay. But the Vedic texts specifically speak of humans performing surgery way back before the reset. Way back before the reset. And it's also there, if you look for it, in the Asian stuff too, in the Asian stories. Okay, so we have to really question what was happening, and could we have been lied to about it? And yes, there's always been primitive people that have chosen to live in extremely primitive worlds because they had no desire or no reason to change. And then there were other humans that probably moved into some other areas because it's a pretty big planet, right? And different cultures have done different things. They know that even within more modern history, you can see primitive people living over here and advanced civilization living over here. So we know that there's always been a lot of diversity within the human experience. So it's interesting, okay? It's very, very interesting. So let's just catch up, okay? So we've got pre-agricultural revolution, reset. Agriculture and religion come onto the scene. The building of empires, slavery, all right? Rapid decline in human health, interbreeding, okay? Interbreeding. And this is when they see the genetic variants starting to pop up all over the place, okay? And again, we've been taught that it's just part of the evolutionary story, okay? But there was like a monkey wrench thrown into the wheel, okay? And then industrial revolutions, and here we are, okay? Here we are. And now the third big industrial revolution, okay, is the digital artificial, EMF, synthetic reality. Okay? This is what we're facing right now. And it is the overtaking of humanity. CRISPR technology, rewriting your genetic program, introducing all of this synthetic RNA into your body. People have been lied to about RNA. If you take just a basic physiology class and learn what RNA does, you'll know that it's actually not secondary to DNA. It actually is DNA's partner. They are partners, okay? They're partners. They work together. They are really part of the same thing. And then you have proteins and stuff that are also part of the same thing. They're not separate. They're all just different levels of the program. Okay, how do people not grasp this? It is killing me, right? To think that there's this many stupid people on the planet, but I can tell you the people on the stage, they know about this. How do you think they have all of this CRISPR technology? They know all of this, okay? And just in case you didn't know, NASA has a huge viral laboratory. The military has huge viral laboratories. You're looking at Silicon Valley with all their shit, okay? And NASA is also huge with the genome research directly tied into the viral laboratory. It is one and the same. And this goes for military too, because guess what? NASA is the military. And this is what Silicon Valley is, okay? It is government military. And they like to think that it's all these independent, big tech and everybody just comes together. No, it's a military operation. And then you have all of these military bases with all of their secret programs and underground bases and underground laboratories. It gets really fucking dark, okay? But I'm gonna stop here because it does get really dark. And I don't really want to talk about that today, okay? So now you start pulling in what the hell is going on, okay? Where did this technology come from? Why? Why have it? Well, you can't convince people to take CRISPR technology if they're really healthy, can you? No. You got to have people have cancer and autoimmune disease and mental illness and all sorts of things. You've got to teach people to be afraid of their environment, of their own bodies. And you have to convince people that this is all just some randomness, that humanity is as sick as it is, and people are as mentally ill as they are. No, it was created and manufactured, okay? Because humanity, our original blueprint, could not be corrupted. So they manipulated a whole bunch of stuff, forced us into an environment that our human biology was not designed for, and you start to see the systemic breakdown of humanity. And right now, we are living in a world that is batshit fucking crazy, okay? And right now, at this moment, there are more acts of war and violent aggression, okay, on this planet more than any other time in history. And people might argue, well, it's because there's more people. No, that's not the problem. That's not why, okay? It's because the agenda keeps marching on. Right now, there's as much conflict on the planet as there was during any of the world wars, all right? So this is where we're at, people. This is where we're at. And I struggle sometimes with how the original blueprint hasn't snapped on for more people yet. But I believe we are going through a transition right now. And I think more and more people are getting turned on. They are getting snapped on. And they're desperate to push their agenda. And I think some people are going to fall into it. And they're just going to go with it. But I think the resistance is brewing. Okay, I really do. I really believe the resistance is brewing. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So I want to talk about skin cancer, and I want to talk about the menopause brain. Now, I've already been 30 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze this into this video to kind of give you a taste. And then I promise I will do another video and I will talk a little bit more about it. Okay? The agricultural revolution required cutting down the world's trees, okay? And since the agricultural revolution, we have cut down half, at least half. That's the conservative estimate, okay? It's the conservative estimate that we've cut down half of all the trees on the planet for agriculture and to make way for this industrial life, this industrial revolution, this industrial way of life. Slavery, okay? To conquer the planet and to have slavery, you got to get rid of all the trees. That makes sense, right? You've got to get rid of all the fucking trees. So that's what they did. They started cutting down all the fucking trees. Doesn't this make sense? All the ancient stories of the green people and the trees? The trees are guardians of the planet, all right? I'm thinking you guys are kind of maybe catching on to this now, okay? So now they cut down all the fucking trees. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And now we have the birth of the agricultural revolution. Okay, people are starting to get skin cancer. People's health is deteriorating rapidly because they're eating a grain-based diet. They're baking out in the sun for hours and hours and hours and hours a day. We aren't meant to be baking out in the sun. And even if you're from Africa, okay, you aren't meant to be baking out in the sun. And even Africa, from all of the research that I've done, used to be lush with trees. And the deserts and the savannas are actually, there's probably always been savannas, you know, for the animals and stuff that live there, but humans didn't live there. Okay, humans were living under the canopies, okay, of the trees. And what has forced people to have to live closer to those areas was the agricultural revolution, okay, and the empires being built and slavery and forcing people into environments that they weren't naturally meant for. And then, of course, nature is going to adapt because if you have to live in the savannah, nature is going to take you from a moderate melanin production to massive, which is why you have some people in Africa that have skin that is like black as black, and then people in Africa that have more of a brown black skin. So you see a variety there too, okay? Because even if you lived in Africa under the dense canopy, we know that the UV is a lot higher there. So they would need melanin to protect them even through the canopy. And not to mention, melanin also protects you from that particular biome that they live in, from that environment, the parasites, the viruses, the bacteria, the fungi, the, you know, all that other stuff that they have to come into contact with every day. So the melanin is a shield for them. It's part of their genetic blueprint to help them survive in that environment, okay, to remain in balance, okay, because everything is about homeostatic balance. But those of us that come from the north, we don't have that melanin, okay? We are absolutely not meant to be out in the sun like that. We just don't have the protective ability, all right? We came from trees, okay? Hunter-gatherers, we lived in shaded environments. We are meant for diffused sunlight. Okay, then you have people that have light skin but have the ability to tan, and these are people that lived in a mixed environment. They had cold winters and hot summers. I have skin like that. Okay, I get very light in the wintertime, extremely light, and I get very, very dark in the summertime if I don't wear sunscreen. Okay, so my body has the ability to go that whole spectrum, and I can get super, super dark. I won't tell you what my dad used to call me when I was little. And no, my father was not prejudiced at all. But you have to remember, I'm almost 60 years old. My family was not prejudiced at all. And I don't believe the prejudice narratives either. Now, I'm not talking about the South. I'm not talking about any other part of the planet. I'm talking about me living in New England. I never met a prejudiced person in my life. Never. Maybe a couple. Like, okay, to be fair, maybe a couple, but they were not in my circle, not at all. I didn't know anybody that was prejudiced. And when I was younger, we had several families move into our town that were variety of the rainbow, let's just say, okay? Actually, no, that's not the right way to look at it. Let's say varying skin colors, okay? From very, very, very dark to, you know, the majority of people that lived there, which were light-skinned people, okay? And there were Indian, there were African, there were all different, okay? And they started coming in when I was I don't know. I don't know how old, but you start noticing more people of a different color, okay, coming into your town. They were all well received by the community and integrated well into the community. The kids that we came into contact with integrated in with us. They were not locked out. They were not kept out. They were not treated any differently. I just am blown away by the mainstream narrative of this whole idea that there's no equality and there's no, you know, equity and whatever. It wasn't true where I lived. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't true somewhere else. Maybe you had groups of people that were really, racist because they were taught to believe that they were superior, maybe because of their religious upbringing. I don't really know. I don't really know why somebody would believe that the color of your skin determines that you're better than anybody else. Like, I don't know where that would come from, but it wasn't happening in my town to any significant degree, because the most popular people in my town welcomed and integrated some of these darker skinned people, okay, with open arms. This is the town I grew up in. And then as I got older, I started to meet people from other areas of the country that were light skinned and said that they had a lot of friends and stuff that moved into their town, and they were openly welcomed. Okay, so I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Again, did it happen in some places? Yeah, I'm not going to deny that it didn't. There's shitty people on the planet. Okay, but it wasn't universal. It absolutely wasn't universal. I didn't experience it in my town. I experienced the complete opposite. And this was true for the town next to us and the towns it was true for the entire area that I lived in. You just didn't see it. They were welcomed for the most part. But we do know that prejudice does exist, and I don't want to deny that. Okay? But there's also people of dark skin that are very prejudiced against white people. And they think it's because white people enslaved them. But what they forget is that they were enslaved on their own continent before white people came and enslaved them. They were enslaved by black people. Every color has enslaved their own color. Okay? Let's just learn real history. So there's that. I'm going to leave that right now. Okay? So now you start to see skin cancer, and you start to see poor health, and you start to see people no longer eating an animal-centric diet, okay? Living on grains and agricultural stuff that's not human food, but some people were able to adapt to it better than others, okay? And obviously, we are an adaptive organism, right? It's like a cockroach. A cockroach can actually survive nuclear fallout, or at least that's what I always was kind of taught or led to believe, that cockroaches can really survive almost anything because they are incredibly adaptive, okay? And humans are incredibly adaptive. So there are definitely people that have adapted to the agricultural diet better than others, all right? So we know that. But there's the ones that refused to blend into the agricultural world, and then they were forced through colonization to enter back in, and this is all colors and all races, okay? There's some of us that didn't make that switch very well. So we don't thrive on an agricultural diet at all. Okay, our bodies fall apart, all right? And our mental ability falls apart, okay? So there's those people that just can't tolerate that. And then we have not been able to adapt to the massive amount of poisons and toxins from the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so there's that too, okay? Our bodies just cannot keep up. All right. So there's layers and layers and layers and layers. And then there's some people that hit the genetic lottery. And these are people that can live to be 100, if not longer, because we're meant to be able to live to be between 120 and 50. That's the information as of today. Maybe longer, maybe. Okay, but as of today, they know that we are physically capable of living to be between 120 and 150. So no, our ancestors weren't all dying at 30. Can we just stop that narrative? Because it's not true. Absolutely not true. And consider today that there's people that live in third world countries that have no access to healthcare whatsoever. They have no access to modern healthcare. And there's people that live to be over 100 in those cultures with no access to the modern system of healthcare, okay? So yes, humans can live that long, even without modern medicine, okay? Unless you have a significant situation, major life-threatening injury, or a heart attack, or something that is significant that requires surgery. But you have to remember our ancestors were significantly healthier than we are, significantly, okay? So short of a major accident, okay, and you didn't have a hospital to put you back together, yes, you were going to die back then. But then we have narratives that humans have been doing surgery since before the agricultural reset. So who knows what's true, okay? I'm just saying. But we know that humans can survive without the modern healthcare system because people have done it. And as a matter of fact, I read a story of a guy who, according to everybody in the village, was 106, okay? And they had access to no modern healthcare. None. Nothing, zero. Absolutely zero. The closest hospital to them was so far away, or clinic, was like a clinic, was hours away for them. Hours. And they don't have cars. Okay, they're not driving. And it would have been hours, like, in a vehicle. Okay. They just didn't have access. Okay. And not everybody was dying at 30. Okay. And do they have high infant mortality? They're starving. They're living on stone pancakes. Okay. So let's not go there. All right. Because that fires me up. All right. So this brings me to increase in skin cancers. Okay. And a whole bunch of other diseases. Because this is when skin cancer came on the scene. Okay. Lack of trees, agricultural diet, humans working out in the sun all day, and just the shit show in general. Okay. And we're going to skip through and we're going to talk a little bit about the female brain, okay, especially when it goes through menopause. And I could tie this into the female reproductive system altogether, and why women, since the agricultural revolution, have suffered from severe menstrual difficulties, severe menstrual pain, PMS, and menopause symptoms, okay? So this is when these things pop up, right? Of course. And we have been lied to about women in Asia. And I was taught in college, because I studied women's health, among other things, but I studied women's health primarily because that's what I was mostly obsessed with, being a woman myself. And I was taught that women in Asia didn't suffer from menopause. And come to find out, that's a lie. That is a lie, okay? It is an absolute bold-faced lie. And then they had to change their narrative because they started realizing that lie was they were getting caught in that lie. So then they created the narrative that women were eating soy products and their plant-based diet prevented them from having menopause symptoms, which again was a lie, okay? They were at one point maybe eating some soy products that help to mitigate some of their hot flashes because it slips into the estrogen receptor that is the regulator of that type of thing going on in a woman's body, okay? But it is mimicry. It is not restorative. It is mimicry, okay? You're still not getting the fat-soluble vitamins, the cholesterol for your sex hormones. It's not helping your thyroid at all. As a matter of fact, it's detrimental to your thyroid, on and on and on and on and on and on, okay? But the fact that women didn't have a word for the distress and suffering of menopause is an absolute fucking lie, okay? And they've been busted. So I'm not even going to defend this. They have been busted, okay? Busted completely. The phone is ringing. I'm going to pick this up in a minute. Signing out.